Hi, this is Phil Shapiro over here in Washington, D.C. I'm talking with Dan Bassill in Chicago. Dan is an educator who I've been following for many years. He's done tutoring and mentoring and organizational building with youth organizations, and I wanted for him to be able to talk about the process he's been using and hope that other people can learn from that. Dan, tell me a little bit about these concept maps.
Hi, Phil. Thanks a lot for reaching out to me. You and I started connecting with each other probably in the early 2000s via some listservs, and it's just been, it's really a testimonial to the internet and what its potential is of how we've stayed connected, and because we've stayed connected, you've not only learned more about what I do, I've learned what you do, and our relationships and willingness to try to help each other have grown. And to me, that represents a tremendous potential for the good things that can happen in the world in the future. So the concept maps, just to give you a little background, I came to Chicago in 1972 to become an advertising copywriter with the Montgomery Ward corporate headquarters in their retail advertising department. I had studied history in college during the 60s and spent 3 years after college in Army intelligence. And both history and Army intelligence are a process of gathering information to make decisions based on best available information. And I've applied that knowledge gathering and decision making process for the last 40 to 50 years, really, both in terms of learning my craft as an advertising manager at Montgomery Ward, but learning what I was doing to try to help inner city kids move through school and into jobs. So the concept maps are part of a series of visualizations that I started doing in the 1990s. I had begun to put the strategies of the tutor-mentor connection, and just the tutor-mentor connection, when we started it, was how can we collect information and share information that people would use to help high-quality volunteer-based tutor-mentor programs be available to inner-city kids in every poverty neighborhood, not just a few good programs at a few places. When we started doing that, we would bring in business people to talk to me about what I was doing. I had started to put the ideas out on a wall in the office where I was. We were given a lot of space at Montgomery Ward, so we had almost 20,000 square feet of office space, a lot of wall space that we could put our strategies out on the wall. I would start to walk people through this, and after a little while, I would hear them talking to whichever person had brought them in, said, boy, he's excited, but I don't know what he's talking about. And what I began to understand was that the ideas I was trying to communicate were not ideas they were thinking about, and therefore there was no intuitional understanding. Their eyes would glaze over, and I would lose them. So I started out to create visualizations, initially with PowerPoint and just drawings of the ideas. And over time, as I learned forms of visualization from other people, I adapted what they showed me, and I got better or more creative in what I was doing. Back in 2005, I hired a former Peace Corps worker to be a technology supporter for me. And as by that time, we'd built a pretty extensive library of information that we hosted on our websites, and the navigation of that information was pretty difficult. So in talking with this young woman about how would we communicate these ideas, she began to explore, and she would bring me visualization things that she thought might work, and she brought me concept maps. This is cmaps.org, which is a free mapping tool, and she showed me how you could take a blank sheet of paper and create maps. And I said, wow, that's pretty cool. And it was easy for me to learn and adapt, so I began to map out the thinking of what I've been doing, and the maps have grown and grown over the last 10 years. Back in October of this past year, I started to put some of my maps I've embedded my maps in blog articles for a long time. I updated my maps recently, and I started to put them in one of my blogs, which is the mappingforjustice.blogspot.com site, and I'll send you the link to that. And in an article starting on October 25th, I show a map that I call a strategy map. And in this map, if you look at the visualization, a concept map allows you to link nodes. So it says, in one node says Dan Bassill Tutor Mentor Institute, and then another node it says the goal is to help kids in poor neighborhoods move through jobs and careers by age 25. So you can follow a path of ideas on a concept map that is kind of a journey map or a guide. And I've been using maps like this for quite a while.
That's so interesting. I noticed on the maps that they've got these hyperlinks, right?
They do. So let me walk you through some of the maps. If you bring up your website at the same time, you can be looking at what I'm talking about.
Sure, yeah.
And so it's mappingforjustice.blogspot.com. And then scroll down to the October 25th article, which says using concept maps to communicate strategy. The way the blog works, if you can click on the image and it will enlarge.
Right.
And in the text of the blog, I also have a hyperlink to the actual web page. Okay. So if you enlarge this image, what you're looking at is in the blue box at the top, it's saying, if you follow to the right, it says the goal is that. And then you follow down to a yellow box and it says youth born or living in poverty neighborhoods will be starting a job and a career by age 25 after college or vocational training. And it also points to a larger yellow box that says leaders and teams in companies, universities, churches, hospitals adopt the Tutor Mentor Connection strategy as their own workforce development, diversity, poverty reduction, or violence prevention strategy. Now, at the bottom of each of these nodes, you can click on the icon there, and it will open up into additional concept maps or into additional websites that further explore the information, and I'll point to some of them in a minute. On the right side of this map, it says that we support the involvement of workplace volunteers who bring skills or who bring different networks. We support leaders and volunteers in comprehensive volunteer-based tutor-based programs located in poverty neighborhoods where youth who need help connect with long-term tutor mentor programs, learning resources, networks of other adults, tutors and mentors, and this connects back to the other side who help them get through school and into jobs and careers. And then on the middle, if you follow down, it uses a 4-part strategy to achieve this goal, and it's achieved by the work of the Tutor Mentor Institute. So this map alone, there's all kinds of leaders in Chicago, around the world, the president right now, who talk in euphemisms. They say, we want a mentor, we want a tutor, we want more kids helping black men, all kinds of different things. What they don't do is create a map that says, our goal is that we do what? And I believe that if more people looked at a map like this, the blue box could be, a version of this map could be on the websites of all kinds of different people, where in the blue box it would be their picture, their company logo, their political image or whatever, where more people would be providing the leadership to do what this map is talking about.
Now, I got to ask you, when you were making this map, was it you on your own or were you talking with somebody else? What was the brainstorming process?
All right, well, so people say to me, what kind of tutoring and mentoring do you do? When I started back at Montgomery Ward in 1972, the company already had a volunteer-based tutoring program. It started in 1965 after the riots in Chicago, where the Chicago Housing Authority had going out to Montgomery Ward, to Sears, to Quaker Oats, to Continental Bank, and to some of the churches, and said, you got to do something. And each of them, in different ways, set up an after-school volunteer-based program that engaged with inner-city kids. The program at Ward's had grown from 1965. It moved into the Montgomery Ward complex in 1970, and I joined it as a volunteer tutor in the fall of 1973, I believe. And I ended up on a Tuesday night sitting next to a fourth grade boy named Leo. And I didn't know anything about what I was doing. But each week as I would go down and meet with Leo, sometimes I really didn't want to go there. I'd had a long day of work. But every time I went, I felt better when I left because Leo was such a great kid. So I was learning from him. And at the end of the year, his mother said to me, "Oh, you got to do it again because Leo talks about you all the time. You're really having a good impact." I said, okay. At the same time, I got talked into being one of the volunteers leading the program. So I went into my second year with Leo, again, meeting every week. But now I began to meet with a group of volunteers who were organizing the thing. And I began to see that it wasn't very well organized. And it wasn't really reaching out to other programs around the city to try to get any ideas from what they were doing. And then at the end of the second year, the guy who had been leading it for the previous few years said, "I'm going to Europe and I'm not coming back for a while. And so you guys need a new leader. And since Dan talks the most, he ought to be the leader." No one disputed that. So all of a sudden, going into my third year, I was responsible for a volunteer-based tutoring program that already had 100 pairs of kids and volunteers starting at the beginning of every year. Very quickly, I said, I don't know what I'm doing, and I was able to get the previous leader and people who had been involved to aggregate their different ideas from their different offices into one place. And I was able to begin to look at the history of where the program had been to begin to say, I understand the vision you guys had, and now I can put it together into a vision I have and present that to Montgomery Ward, to the local schools, to the Housing Authority, saying, if you guys will support us doing this, then I will continue to provide the volunteer leadership to try to make it happen. And then I began, someone else at Montgomery Ward said, "Dan, you don't know much about what you're doing. There must be other people, and invite them to lunch, see what you can learn." So I started to do that. And all through the 70s and 80s, I began to understand that the person maintaining the database was the only one who could invite people together and the only one who could talk knowledgeably about the availability of these programs all over the city. As we led our program, though, I began to realize that while we called it a tutoring program, we had to do an awful lot of mentoring before the kids were motivated to do any learning. And over time, I began to call it a tutor-mentor program, because as kids grow up, the different things that happen in their lives cause them to move backwards and forwards in terms of their motivation and their habits of learning. We're always mentoring. Parents are the best mentor kids have. Teachers are the best tutors they have. But kids are all different in terms of their aspirations and their motivations and the things going on in their lives. So we're always mentoring and tutoring. So over the years, as I've understood that the role of the mentor or the tutor is an extra adult helping kids have the things they need in their lives to help them move from one grade level to the next grade level and ultimately out of school and into job. It's your network that makes a difference. The people you know, the influences around you. It's not necessarily the act of tutoring or the act of mentoring that is as important as the extra network of adults. I use geographic maps. If you close this graphic on the concept map and scroll down into the blog board, you'll see geographic maps of Chicago, where if you add overlays of indicators like poverty or poorly performing schools or violence, you'll see large parts of the city that have huge populations of kids and families that live in intense concentrated poverty. In those neighborhoods, poverty is a one-dimensional thing where you don't have a lot of other people modeling all the different kinds of jobs and careers and opportunities kids in more affluent areas have, and you don't have people opening doors and providing access to those opportunities. Instead, you have an awful lot of people modeling negative aspirations, people that have been in the justice system, people that are involved in illegal industries, people who have not finished high school or gone to college, and there's less opportunities for learning and recreation and safety in the non-school hours than there are in the lives of kids in more affluent areas. So I had to begin to use maps to try to communicate these ideas. And the idea of a tutor mentor in an organized program is the idea of a place where people who don't necessarily think about poverty every day, or very seldom, who begin to think about it through the eyes of the kids that they bond with as part of a tutor mentor organization. The longer you're connected with kids, I mean, I talk about what I do the way I do because I've been doing it for 40 years. And I've been doing it every day for the last 20 years. And it's that the growing empathy, the growing understanding, the personalization of your relationships with the kids and the families in the neighborhoods you're working with that drives your motivation for what you're willing to do to help them overcome the poverty that they live in. Does that help you there?
Yes. The thing I like about your work, Dan, is that you are creating signposts. Any individual or a leader in a city, if they have a destination, your web resources that you're assembling end up being signposts. Follow these signs if you want to go to that direction, so that people don't have to discover. They don't have to figure out. Less individual self-discovery.
Well, let's go back to the maps a little bit more.
Sure.
So I started out with this concept map showing a strategy map, and I said that thousands of people could adopt this strategy in their own activities. It could be business leaders, it could be political leaders, it could be groups on college campuses, it could be groups in high schools. Thousands of people could adopt this strategy, meaning a lot more people every day would be doing something to help kids in poor neighborhoods have access to opportunities and so forth. Well, if you scroll up on the blogs to the article on October 28th and look at the image there, and so this is the mentoring kids to career part of this that was on the strategy map. And what it shows is that kids in elementary school need a whole bunch of different supports in their lives in order for them to move successfully from elementary school to middle school. And in middle school, they need a whole bunch of the same types of supports, but they need to be age appropriate. And at middle school, you begin to add in things like job shadowing and things that begin to help kids begin to build aspirations for what they want to be. And then in high school, you again have the same things, but now you have more things that are preparing you for college or careers. And then you move into the college or vocational path, and that then leads you into a job and a career. That's a 12 to 16 year path. And there's no funding stream that in America, public or private, other than funding for public schools maybe, that provides this type of support for non-school organizations to be available in high poverty neighborhoods in cities like Chicago, New York, Detroit, and so forth. So in this chart under the elementary school section over to the left, it says tutors and mentors are extra people who help kids have access to these things in their neighborhood. And this is what I was saying just a few minutes ago. So if you close this graphic and then scroll up again, and it says, how does the city get from here to there? And so the top graphic is just the where we are now and where we want to be in the future. There's so many people that say, why don't they do something? And very few people sit down with a piece of paper and says, where are we now and how do we get to where we want to be and what would it look like when we get there? So the next graphic in that blog is the 4-part strategy. And if you enlarge that, so the first map that I showed you was our commitment is that we want to help kids get through school and into jobs and careers. And the second map I showed you was that we need to have a range of programs in every neighborhood that help kids access to a whole bunch of different supports. And those, depending on the degree of poverty in the neighborhood or the degree of isolation, then the programs in those neighborhoods would have to offer a wider range of supports. I've often compared a tutor mentor program to a Walgreens or a Sears or a Montgomery Ward, which have a whole bunch of different things that attract customers from that neighborhood to come to that store and shop. A tutor mentor program needs to have a whole bunch of different age-appropriate learning supports to attract kids to come and to motivate them to keep coming, but also to attract volunteers to come and to attract donors and media and other people to come.
Right.
So the strategy then, what am I doing to enable this to happen, and how does this relate to what other people could be doing? The strategy, if you think this wheel at point 1 at around 1 o'clock on the wheel chart is collecting information. Back in the 70s, when I started to lead a tutor mentor program and I was reaching out to other people, I was collecting information for what I would do as a tutor each week. And then when I became a leader, I was collecting information to say, how do I recruit volunteers? How do I support volunteers? How do I recruit kids? How do I support kids? What are the things we would do every week to motivate them to come, to keep coming, to help them become more effective tutors, mentors, learners, and so forth? And so I was collecting information from other people that supported me and what I was doing. And as I began to build a network connecting me to leaders of other programs, I began to share my library with them. And over the years, as my library grew, when we started the Tutor Mentor Connection back in 1992, late 92 and 93, we didn't have the internet, but we had a lot of space. And so the reports and the folders and the training manuals and the information I was gathering over previous years about other people's programs, I began to put into an actual library organized into sections that people could come to, and they could browse that library and borrow ideas just as I was to support either starting a program or helping a program get better. When the internet came along, we moved this library to the internet because the different reports that we were collecting from different researchers and so forth, they only represented a fraction of the knowledge that those people had to offer, which they were now making available on their own websites. So by linking to the other people's websites, we were enlarging the amount of information other people had. One of the pieces of knowledge that I've been collecting was that, and really the fundamental piece, was back when we started the Tutor Mentor Connection, and way back when I started reaching out to find tutor mentor programs in Chicago, we began to see that we could do things together to train our volunteers, and we started doing that. And then we began to say, well, we got a lot of space, maybe we could invite other people from different programs to participate, but there was no directory telling us who the other programs were in the city. And that condition existed all the way through the early 1990s. At the same time, occasionally there would be such a tragedy of a violence in Chicago or bad news about schools that it would go front page on the newspapers, where the newspapers would say, we got to stop this, we got to do something, it's everybody's responsibility. But when they did that, they were only pointing to the neighborhood where the incident took place. And if they were talking about activities that might be used, they were only talking about brand name youth programs that were well known. They weren't really talking about all of the different tutoring and or mentoring programs in the city or in the different neighborhoods of the city. So we said, why don't we fill the void? Why don't we build a master database of who the different tutor mentor programs are? And as we started to do that, someone said to me, how are you going to display that information? And I said, I don't know. And she pulled a geography magazine out of her library. She said, why don't you try to map it? And as I looked at how you could map data, I fell in love with it. And so when we launched our first surveys back in 1994, we reached out to about 500 people and said, do you do some kind of tutoring and mentoring? If you do, tell us what type of you do. Is it pure tutoring, pure mentoring, tutor mentoring? What age group do you serve? Middle school, elementary school, high school? What time of the day do you do it? School, right after school, after work hours or on the weekends, and where do you do it? And 120 programs respond to that survey, and we begin to publish that in a directory, and we begin to map the information. And we mapped it so that people could sort it by age group or type of program or neighborhood, meaning that if you were on the south part of Chicago, you could look for programs in your area relative to the age group of the youth you were trying to help or your own kids. When the internet came along, we began to move that into a website, and then during the 2000s, we began to build an interactive version and a searchable version. And in 2007, we created an interactive map version. And I've continued to try to maintain that over the last few years. But this is the basic part of the library. Anyone who gets up today in Chicago or any city in the world that reads a story about violence or poverty or poor schools, they ought to have a knee-jerk reaction that says, I'll go to this website and I'll look at a map of my city to see where that happened, and I'll go into a library to see are there organizations that I can help who are in those neighborhoods, or if there's a neighborhood that I want to help that doesn't have programs, then I'll know that I can find information that I can use from my business, my church, my company, my whatever, to help a program start in that neighborhood, borrowing from the library of information that is available that we could use. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can borrow ideas from other people. And so this section 1 of this library has grown over the last 20 years now of information that I or anyone else could use to help a program constantly get better by borrowing ideas from other people, as long as the resource providers are in the same conversation with us. So the second stage on this is all the information we collect is useless if no one's looking at it. And you and I talking today is part of the process of how do we get people to look at it. When I was at Montgomery Ward, my budget in the 1980s for retail advertising was about $250 million a year. And that meant that every week we were able to put out 3 waves of advertising to about 20 million people saying, come to our stores and this week we got a deal for you. And we did that every week, and we did it every year. And in the nonprofit sector, we don't have advertising dollars, and therefore all the different people leading youth-serving organizations and other needed services, they aren't able to be out there every day saying to volunteers and donors, come to me, help me do what I do to put these good ideas to work, helping my program be better at helping my clients. And so, in recognizing that, the second part of the Tutor Mentor Connection strategy is raising public awareness. How do we increase the reach and frequency of stories talking about tutoring and mentoring as a way to get more people engaged in helping kids in poverty neighborhoods have the support they need to move through school and into jobs and careers and staying safe in the non-school hours as they go through that process. Since we don't have advertising dollars, we've had to develop events and do other kinds of things that would motivate the media to tell our stories. When the internet came along, then we've developed all kinds of different strategies, again, like you and I today, where other people are helping us communicate this message and where other people would take ownership of the message and communicate it through their own media. So getting better information is a constant process, and I've never had nearly enough resources to do this as well as I want to, but getting people to look at that information is equally important. But then the third part, if you go to part 3 on this map, is facilitating an understanding of the information. Remember, I said that when people started to come and talk to me in the 90s, their eyes would glaze over, and they would tune me out. Well, generally speaking, if someone's been listening to us talk for as long as we've talked right now, they've tuned me out unless they're really deeply interested. But if they are deeply interested, then we need to be able to facilitate an understanding of this information. I talked to somebody in libraries recently, and I've really engaged with library people for years. People at the Chicago Public Library used to tell me that they've been using my directories even if they're 2 or 3 years old because it's the best information they have available to help people understand what tutoring and mentoring programs are available in Chicago. But the libraries have really innovated what they're doing, and most libraries have a facilitator team that is helping people who come to the library understand and find and use the information in the library. That means the same type of people, whether it be groups of people in companies, group of people in faith organizations, learning communities, could be digging into this library of information about where kids need help, what help they need, how do you find help, how do you build programs, and so forth, and creating an understanding of the information based on who you are and what you can do to support the growth of programs in neighborhoods where programs are needed. So the better information, that's step 1. More people looking at the information, that's step 2. Better understanding of the information, that step 3 leads to more things people do to generate a flow of volunteers, dollars, ideas, technology into high poverty neighborhoods, making more and better and more comprehensive tutor mentor programs available to kids at the elementary school level, at the middle school level, at the high school level, helping kids move through school and into jobs and careers. So that's what this 4-part strategy is mapping out. And there's all kinds of different things people could be doing to support any one of those pieces. What's unique about this in total is that we're not just an information collector, we're not just an information facilitator, we're doing things to try to get more people to look at this information every day, and we're trying to create motivation that sparks people to do something, to be a volunteer, to be a donor, to get involved, to stay involved, that sustains this as an ongoing process year after year after year. If we were only doing one piece of this, it wouldn't work. Because of the internet, I've connected to kids and volunteers who were part of our tutoring programs all the way back into the 70s. I'm still connected to the young man who was a 4th grader in 1973. He's now 50 years old. In fact, he invited me down to Nashville this past August to be part of his 50th birthday celebration. And he said he wanted me to come, and he paid my way and paid for my room and everything because he knew I didn't have very much money. Because he said, I've been an important part of his life. When I got there, I said, you've been an important part of my life too. Back when, in the 70s and 80s, we would have people say, how many of your kids are going to college? And I look them in the eye and say, we go to 6th grade. And it's hard enough to keep the program going for 2nd to 6th graders. We don't have the ability to keep track of our kids after they've left us. So we don't know how many have gone to college. Now, a few years later, we were able to survey some of the kids who had graduated in 1986 to see where they were in 1992, and we found that an awful lot of them were not in college. And in fact, an awful lot of them have dropped out of high school already before graduating. And so we recognized the need for a support system from 7th grade to 12th grade, and that's part of why we did Cabrini Connections. But we still didn't have that ability to connect with kids. And when we started Cabrini Connections, that didn't change. Our first group of kids were in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and by 1997 and 98, some of those kids had begun to graduate from high school, and we knew they were going on to college and other things, but we still didn't have a way to keep track of them. It wasn't until about 2002 that we even began to use an email newsletter to communicate weekly ideas to our kids and volunteers. And it wasn't until 2005, 2006, when Facebook and LinkedIn began to happen, that we began to see the possibility of reconnecting to kids and volunteers from the past to help them be part of a community that not only was helping the kids that were still coming up, that was viable to them in their own adult lives. And in the 10 years since then, I've systematically gone out through LinkedIn and Facebook and built connections to the point where I'm probably connected to 50 to 100 of former kids, former volunteers. And in many cases, I've been trying to coach some of them to take over for me in leading the Tutor Mentor Connection to make Tutor Mentor programs available to their own kids and to their own nieces and nephews who may still be living in high poverty neighborhoods. Most of these kids are the kids that came out of Cabrini Connections. They're still in the first ones are just in their early 30s and still getting started in their lives. The alumni that I've kept connected to from past years are in different stages of where they are. But so far, I've had people begin to tell me, boy, I really valued being part of the program. It really made a difference. I'm still connected to so-and-so. That hasn't yet led to anyone becoming an advocate for tutoring and mentoring and doing things to mobilize the resources to support the growth of tutoring and mentoring programs. But I'm continuing to work toward that, and I hope it will happen.